Before living ancestrally, you'll look like this. And after living ancestrally, you'll look like this. Seems pretty straightforward. If you want these results, just start throwing spears and downing bull testicles. But unless you've been living under a rock, you know that this body wasn't built with ancestral living, but instead with $11,000 a month worth of performance-enhancing drugs. So I started to wonder, why do we keep getting tricked by this? What is it about personal stories that seems so good, but is actually so bad? Well, it turns out the persuasiveness of personal stories, sometimes referred to as anecdotes, have actually been studied, and the reviews seemed a bit mixed. Some studies found that anecdotes were more persuasive than statistical evidence. Others found the opposite, and some were more murky. But a meta-analysis in 2020, that's like a study that compiles data from a bunch of other studies, disentangled this mystery. It turns out that most of the time, statistical evidence is actually more persuasive, but there are particular scenarios when that observation seems to flip, specifically when the decision is health-related, is personally relevant, or involves severe consequences. So when it comes to things like ancestral living, this is clearly personally relevant and health-related. And so we can expect that anecdotes are actually going to be more persuasive than statistical evidence. And that wouldn't be such a problem if anecdotes weren't literally the worst form of evidence. In fact, on most hierarchies of evidence, they're not even included. Or if they are, they're on the very bottom. So pause to appreciate the gravity of this for a minute. In these scenarios, we've got the worst evidence being the most persuasive. If the worst evidence was as persuasive as the best evidence, we'd already have a serious problem on our hands. Even if anecdotal evidence was a little less persuasive, that would still be a serious problem since the persuasiveness is totally out of proportion with just how bad anecdotal evidence is. But this isn't just out of proportion, it's completely inverted. And for regular viewers of this channel, this is extra bad news when it comes to ex-vegans, since they are tapping into health-related, personally relevant, and alleged severe consequences, making them the perfect storm of unwarranted persuasiveness. But what is the problem with anecdotes? Why are they such trash evidence? Why shouldn't you smoke just because your uncle did and lived to 102? Let's start with Liver King. The most obvious problem is the person relating the anecdote can just straight up be lying.
And when asked if I've ever taken steroids, I've always said no, I don't touch this stuff, not gonna touch this stuff, never touch the stuff. That was a lie.
And even if they're not lying, there's a good chance they're misremembering potentially important details, not only about the intervention in question, but also about all the other things that may have changed at the same time. The problems with human memory are disturbingly underappreciated by the average person, who generally holds the view that memory is sort of like a recording device that leaves out some details from time to time. When in fact, not only are nearly all of our memories contaminated with at least some errors, entirely false memories can arise for a variety of reasons and have even been reliably created in laboratory settings.
Shaw was able to convince over 70% of participants that they committed a crime.
I was incredibly surprised at the rate that I had in terms of successfully implanting these false memories.
So how many of our memories are not completely true?
I would say 100% of your memories are not completely true, but that needs lots of little sort of asterisks.
Information has been gathered on 300 innocent people, 300 defendants who were convicted of crimes they didn't do, and now DNA testing has proven that they're actually innocent. And when those cases have been analyzed, 3/4 of them are due to faulty memory, faulty eyewitness memory.
And that's the thing with these false memories, is because they have the complexity of real memories. You can't just look at a memory and say that's true or that's false.
Many people believe that memory works like a recording device. You just record the information, then you call it up and play it back when you want to answer questions or identify images. But decades of work in psychology has shown that this just isn't true. Our memories are constructive. They're reconstructive. Memory works a little bit more like a Wikipedia page. You can go in there and change it, but so can other people.
Memory isn't just a network, but it's also a social construction. Every time you share a memory in a group, you're tailoring the memory for your audience. You're telling them things that you think they're going to be interested in. We're reinforcing the most exciting bits, and we're leaving out things that we think might be boring to other people. Sometimes we steal other people's memories. We take pieces out of their brains and put them into our own. We are all memory thieves. We're constantly stealing pieces of memories from other people, and they're stealing pieces of ours.
With false memories, what's happening is you're taking real pieces of information and you're recombining it in a way that never actually happened.
But let's say we find out this scandal was totally fabricated. Liver King didn't actually mainline gallons of his special muscle juice.
I don't know how many gallons we have in here, maybe 30 gallons or so.
And he has a perfect memory and records of everything he's done. This still wouldn't be good evidence that living ancestrally will get you this body, because the problems with anecdotes are endless. For starters, this is an N of 1. That means that the sample size is only one person. This is important because sample size is one of the most fundamental concepts in statistics. And generally, the larger the sample, the more statistical power it has, and the more confident you can be in the results. Small sample sizes can be skewed by outliers and generally are less representative of the population at large. But what do I mean by representative? Well, imagine someone allergic to apples eats an apple and then claims apples are bad for you. Clearly, apples are bad for them, but they aren't a good representation of the population at large because most people aren't allergic to apples. But now imagine a study of 1,000 people where just one person is allergic to apples. Their allergy and resulting health problems will barely skew the data because they are only a fraction of the entire sample. And so this fraction better represents the number of people who are actually allergic to apples in the general population. Likewise, it could be that a small number of people respond really well to living ancestrally and Liver King just happens to be one of them, which brings us to sampling biases. Let's say every day for the next year, you read about someone who got absolutely jacked by living ancestrally. Would that be good evidence for ancestral living? Still possibly not. Why? Because of something called survivorship bias. The people who tried living ancestrally and either got no results or even negative results are not only going to be much less likely to post on social media, but also less likely to blow up on social media and get pushed in front of your eyeballs. While the exact opposite is true for people who did get results, particularly those with exceptional results. In other words, those with good results are going to survive in the social media ecosystem in a way that those who got poor results won't. And specifically, they'll survive in such a way that you see them and clock them as a success in your mind while ignoring all those who failed. So the problem is we don't ultimately know the percentage of people who saw results and who didn't. Think of it this way. If 1 million people tried living ancestrally for a year and only 0.0365% of them actually had positive results, an objectively terrible success rate, social media could still show you a new ancestral success story every day for an entire year. So just pause for a second and think about how that would affect your assessment of ancestral diets. This would feel like extremely compelling positive evidence, even though the data shows the exact opposite. And this is one reason why we say the plural of anecdote is not evidence. Piling on additional uncontrolled anecdotes in this instance not only didn't improve your perception of reality, it actively harmed it. And this sort of scenario could trick you even if you were a truly objective, unbiased observer, which you definitely aren't. If you're inclined to want to believe in magic bullets or specifically in something like ancestral living, confirmation bias, a bias we all fall prey to, could make this even worse, causing you to actively seek out and remember success cases while explaining away and forgetting examples of ancestral failures. But perhaps the most well-known issue with anecdotes is that it's extremely difficult to establish causality. For instance, if someone starts drinking their own urine and their skin clears up, it might be tempting for them to claim that the pee cured their acne. Just because their skin cleared up after the urine doesn't mean it was caused by it. This is because the environment is filled with all sorts of confounding variables, which could be affecting the quality of your skin and which are unrelated to your drinking habits. Did the pee drinking also coincide with you exercising more or maybe less? Did your diet change in other ways? Did you get outside in the sun more? Did you happen to get better sleep or take more showers or exfoliate more or change the brand of your face wash or delete Tinder once and for all? And confounders don't even need to be that obvious. Maybe your microbiome changed due to a low-grade infection you were unaware of. Maybe your acne is cyclical over the course of the year. Maybe there was some stressor in your life that was recently removed but that you didn't consciously recognize was causing you anxiety. Now, it might be that you implement a single new change that is actually comprised of many smaller changes like ancestral living. Let's say you try Liver King's 9 ancestral tenets. You see results and you conclude that living ancestrally is what did it. The problem is any one of those tenets or a combination of those tenets could have given you results while the rest did nothing. Exercising, getting good sleep, and connecting with others are all well-supported actions you can take to improve your physical and mental health. Avoiding seed oils, grounding, and shielding yourself from excessive Wi-Fi, not so much. And I haven't even talked about placebo and nocebo effects, wishful thinking, the halo effect, appeals to jackedness, or tribal psychology. But the point is this: these are all the sorts of things that actual solid science will control for. Good science will use large representative samples, they will control for confounding variables and minimize selection biases, they will have a control group, they will take rigorous measurements and record all their data, and they will submit their study to peer reviewers whose job it is to find flaws and weak points in their research. In short, science recognizes all the flaws of common sense and anecdotes and seeks to systematically eliminate, or at the very least greatly minimize their impacts. And this doesn't mean that science never gets anything wrong, but it does mean if peer-reviewed data says one thing and your Uncle Mike's anecdote says another,
I come on here and talk about my own personal experiences, and my experiences men are better drivers than women.
It's not very smart to listen to Uncle Mike. And this is why scientific literacy is so important.
If I've learned anything from these decades of working on these problems, it's this. Just because somebody tells you something and they say it with confidence, just because they say it with lots of detail, just because they express emotion when they say it, it doesn't mean that it really happened. We can't reliably distinguish true memories from false memories. We need independent corroboration.
As the great Richard Feynman said, the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool.
The truth of life is the truth that you experience as an individual. That is the only truth that we all live within.
And if you want to help me make this my full-time career, check out the Patreon in the description. And shout out to Ryan O'Neill, Tom Eisenbeiss, Nutbase News, Monstar, David Yastrzemski, and Maxwell Edison.